Here we are at the Ecarde Crossroads. This is the road from Pegasus Bridge. That leads down to Merville, and here we have the hill that runs up to Amfreville. 3 Troop, 3 Commando came cycling along here as if they were on a country ride, stopped here, and originally they would be given orders to go to Cabourg, but this had been changed because the 9th Parachute Battalion, at the top of the hill, over to the left, where the Chateau d'Amfreville was, and they needed help in liberating the village. So the Commandos left their bikes here and then started moving up the road, either side, section by section, covering one another. Amfreville, at the top of the hill, sits overlooking the landing zone. It's a very important position because it's on the high ground. The 9th Parachute Battalion were over where those trees are. They'd come out of the Merville Battery with 150 men. They'd put a probe into Amfreville, realised it was too heavily occupied by the Germans to take it, so they'd taken up a defensive position behind the walls of a big chateau just over there where the trees were. The Commando, 3 Troop 3 Commando, come all the way from Sword Beach, and they are the furthest probe forward into no man's land in effect. So they don't know what really to expect. It's all new. So they started to move up this hill, a section at a time on either side of the road, until they get to the top of the hill. There's a hedge at the top with that apex house. This is the top of the hill at Amfreville. In that direction is Sword Beach. Over that way was the Merville Battery, and just there is the Chateau d'Amfreville, where the 9th Parachute Battalion were holed up. This building beside me is the gable-ended house, and had a window in the end where the men were all looking at it. Just as the troop came round this corner, a Russian Maxim gun opened up from over there, killing, as it turned out, immediately 2 of them Commandos, wounding Roy Wesley, the troop commander. The rest of the troop backed off down. He must have been a nervous machine gunner, because if he'd have waited a few seconds, he'd have had the whole troop in the open. They went back a bit. 2 of the blokes then came forward and tried to drag the 2 bodies back to try and get them treatment. One of those was hit. One of the chaps called Hill, bullet went through. He was one of the few wearing a helmet. All of them wearing berets, but he got fed up with the sound of it knocking on his handlebars. So he was wearing a helmet, it went straight through his helmet and out the back and left a furrow in his head. He was sent off down the bottom of the road. Captain Roy Wesley, who was in charge of the troop, he was hit in the wrist and arm. So Lieutenant Ponsford took over. He took a group then round, he left some here, took a group around the field and around this house. Well, Keith Ponsford came out of the alleyway just over there with his group. A 2-inch mortar was sending fire into the post office area. This group come up the hill and putting pressure on the post office from that direction. And they were very quickly overcome. To 3 Troop of 3 Commando were the first people into Amfreville. And of course they met up with the 9th, who'd give them supporting fire during their attack. This is the southern end of Amfreville, and the attack by Lieutenant Ponsford from that direction of the post office. Once that would become successful, some of the men came in this direction up towards the Saulnier farm. Jimmy Sinnott reached here, met Bernard Saulnier and asked if there were any Germans about, which he said there weren't in this particular area. And when Jimmy Sinnott got here, he was the first commando to actually reach this position. Shortly after, Colonel Otway of the 9th Battalion came into the village, into the church, went into the church tower and found 6 dead Germans that had been killed in the altercation during the morning. The rest of the 3 Troop 3 Commando then went into the area behind the church and the town hall, came under mortar fire, and then went across here into ditches along this line and held those ditches, and that in effect was the front line for the next few months actually, that over in that direction. The Saulnier farm, now really known as a Commando farm, because Bernard welcomed the Commandos with open arms. It became the headquarters for Mills Roberts, the CO of 6th Commando, at risk for himself, because the Germans would have known this would be a position, ideal position to be mortared. The Commando took up positions just beyond these houses, in the fields, in the ditches in the fields. There's a slight slope up with a hedge on the top, but they didn't take that position because they knew the Germans would have that hedge registered. And that's exactly what happened. When attacks came in, they were expecting the Commandos to be on that hedge. And when they came through the hedge, they were rather bewildered to be allowed into the garden and then to be hit heavily after that. But this was their position for quite some time in the campaign. Just looking in the other direction, number 6 Commando Memorial. This road leads down across the DZ towards Ronville, and a track also led off down towards Pegasus Bridge. A little bit later, 6th Commando did come up from that direction. Three troop of 6th Commando, led by Captain Alan Pyman, who was actually the first commando group to reach Pegasus Bridge and get across. Their job had been to get to Breville Crossroads. Captain Alan Pyman had come up the track and then gone along the road there towards Breville and occupied the Breville Town Hall. They'd gone on little patrols, and unfortunately, as he was going through a little garden area, Pyman was killed by a sniper. That little group of commandos were quite isolated, and eventually about 9 o'clock at night they managed to get out along the road and rejoin the rest of the commando here. This is the Grand Ferme de Buisson. This position sits in that direction. You have Sword Beach, in that direction the Merville Battery and the Cavalry Cross. After the assault on the battery, they left the cavalry, went through the wood that was beside the cavalry and then across cornfields. All this was cornfields, and were going across that direction when they came under fire from this position. In the assault on the battery, the left flank was supposed to be protected by the A Company, the 1st Canadian Parachute Battalion, but due to their scattered drop, only 6 had arrived at the battery. So Colonel Otway sent those 6 Canadians here and they cleared this position. The Canadians rejoined the column and then shortly after separated and went to their position at brigade headquarters. The 9th Parachute Battalion then carried on through the Colne, heading towards the village of Amfreville. Over the next few days, this farm was in no man's land. The Commandos had come across the bridges and occupied the ridge in that direction in Amfreville and Hauga. The Germans were beyond the road and beyond the field just over in that direction. So this was used as a staging post for both sides before they set out on patrols or as observation, that kind of thing. So there were many altercations here when those patrols ran into one another. This is the remains of the Chateau d'Amfreville, and that's a position that the 9th Parachute Battalion, or the survivors, the 75 to 100 men, had occupied after coming from the Cavalry Cross. The chateau itself was at the far end of these enclosing walls. The 9th Parachute Battalion had taken up position around these walls and had a big sniping battle with Germans that were in the church tower. They knew from a patrol that the village was too heavily defended for them to get through. Also, they were running low on ammunition. So they set up positions around the walls, and throughout the morning there was a sniping battle going on and little actions, particularly with snipers in the church tower in the middle of the green. Although obviously it was the responsibility of the 6th Airborne Division to occupy this area east of the River Orne and carry out its primary tasks, a lot of the time it's overlooked that the 1st Special Service Brigade was attached to the 6th Airborne Division. Their role in the plan was to occupy this part of the ridge from Hauga up to Amfreville. They did have objectives further beyond, i.e. the 3 Commando was supposed to get to Cabourg, but there was no way ever that 3 Commando were going to get there. In fact, although 3 Troop of 3 Commando came up here, the pressure on Ronville during the day forced Gale to divert the remainder of 3 Commando into Ronville for a short period. But here the Commandos sat for 2 months under heavy attack initially, carrying out constant aggressive patrolling, and that is why this area really is a Commando area. And the people who live here have always appreciated that, especially here at the Saulnier farm, which has had such close links with them ever since the war. Normandy campaign is usually associated with hedgerows, constant problems, that kind of thing, movement. As you can see here, this area was quite wide open, big, wide open fields, cornfields, a lot of cornfields in the area. That obviously had its own problems with movement, because on a position like this, you could see for miles, and you can see movement, you could see the British movement coming towards you, and you could set up ambushes, that kind of thing. Conversely, the men, the paras, all the Commandos just had to take risks and cross open ground until the Germans opened fire, then react to that. I suppose one advantage that the Commandos did have was that they were assembled units. They did have most of their firepower. Obviously they'd had some losses on the beach, and then a few getting through Saint-Aubin d'Archenay and into Benneville and up to this position, but they were quite minor up until this stage. Whereas the paras, many of those with the scattered drops were still in small groups, still lost, some of them, always looking round and trying to find location, perhaps defensive positions to sit for a while, but always in their minds to get back to the battalion and the position that they were designated. These buildings are typical of the ones around Normandy. I mean, obviously there's lots of wide open spaces, arable land, areas that were used for stud farms, that kind of thing. But when the Commandos or the paras encountered houses like this, whether they were single or whether they were in streets, they knew exactly what to do, because they'd been trained in street fighting in bombed out locations in England, particularly Southampton or parts of the East End of London. They would do mouse holing through room to room using explosives, this kind of thing. So they had techniques for, in effect, if they were occupied, they'd go in one end and try and chase the Germans out the other end, and Commandos would be at the other, be waiting for them to come out. So there was a specific procedure that they'd been trained through if they encountered locations like this and they were occupied. Windows in this position give you a good idea of how useful those slits would be in a defensive position with a machine gun in place. Very difficult to approach. Again, it was all down to the intelligence really, and flexibility and training of the paras and the Commandos if they encountered something like this. Snipers, although a truly trained professional sniper would not use a window like that, but any high point advantage in such a flat area is always going to be an advantage, whether it's just for observation or actually sniping.